Hello, friends. It's good to be with you again. I've missed you being in Trinity Kids Worship. This is some interesting times we find ourselves, and I know all of you are home from school right now, and although that can be exciting, for some people it's not so fun. They miss their friends, they miss their teachers, they miss the schedule and sort of the routine of their day. And I know how that is. So I miss my routine too. I miss being with you. So I just wanted to check in and see how you were doing, and maybe to do our TKW story from last week since we weren't able to be together. I know you have wondered what is in our bag, our Lent in a bag for week 3. So I want to just remind a few of you, some of you weren't with us, but we have a Lent in a bag right here. And in it are a few different items that sort of remind us of the stories that we learn about during this time. Our first week, if anybody remembers what we had in our bag, we had sand. And for those of you that were at church a couple of weeks ago, maybe you could tell your parents or your brothers or sisters why we talked about sand. And if you remember, it's because Jesus went to the desert to pray. Now, this was right after he had been baptized by his cousin John, and he went into the desert to be in prayer with his Father, and the devil came and tempted him in 3 different ways, and he was able to outsmart the devil each time. And so we remember that story with our bag of sand. So then the next week, we talked about how things have the ability to change. And one of those things that we talked about were seeds or bulbs that we plant in the ground, and how even though sometimes it looks like it is decaying or dying, it's actually changing. And so as that bulb changes inside and starts to grow a plant, the outside of that bulb starts to fall away, and it looks like it's dying. But actually it's just giving birth to something new, and so it's changing. And that reminds us that we have hope in Jesus and that he can change us. And we talked about other things that change. Some of our friends mentioned butterflies, right? Caterpillars changing into butterflies. And so we each have that ability to change and to be that hope for someone else. So God can work those little miracles through us, just like when we talk about bread. How many of you have made bread at home? Right? And so sometimes that dough, in order to make it rise, we have to put something in it, and that's called yeast. And that yeast is teeny tiny. You can't see it do its magic except through a microscope. And so that yeast is teeny tiny, and it can transform that dough and make it rise and turn into delicious fluffy bread. And so we are like that. God can transform us. He can use us to change people or things around us. And so we have that power too. So today is week 3, and we have another item in our bag. And let me reach in here and see what we have. Today's item is a rock. So I wonder why we have a rock. Well, do you remember when Jesus went into the desert and he was tempted? One of the things that the devil tempted him to do was to transform stone into bread because he was so hungry. He didn't have food or water in the desert. And so the devil said to Jesus, "Why don't you turn that stone into bread and you can eat?" And so Jesus' answer, do you remember, was that we live on, not on bread alone, right? We don't live on bread alone, but we live on the words from the Bible and from God. So I'm wondering, are there other places where Jesus can use us to transform us and feed us, right, through other things? Might there be a place in you that maybe is hard and not very it's not nourishing. I wonder if there's a place in you or a habit or something that maybe you could change that would then bring life, and you could share that gift with somebody else. I'm going to read you a story that's pretty neat, actually. So it's from the book of Exodus, and this book was about when the people from Jerusalem were in exile in Egypt for 40 years. They were slaves. And then God told them to leave Egypt, and he led them into the desert where there was no water and no food, and they were really angry with God. And so I'm going to read you this story. God's people were on the move, just as God had commanded. They made a camp at Rephidim, but there was no water for anyone to drink. The people were mad at Moses and yelled, "Give us water." And Moses said, "Why are you yelling at me? You people are hard to please." And the people whined and they said, "Why did you bother to take us out of Egypt only to let us and our children and our animals die of thirst?" Moses wasn't happy with God either. "What am I supposed to do with these people?" Moses said. "They're so angry and they're thirsty and they want to kill me." And God said, "Get some of your best men together and take that staff with you that you turned the Nile River into blood and go on a hike. Walk as far as Horeb, and I will be standing there on a rock. Hit that rock with your staff, and you will have water for everyone to drink. Water will gush from that rock." So Moses did as God told him to do, and water came from that rock, just as God said it would. God's people had whined and pushed God to the edge, but now they had water to drink. The word of the Lord. So in this story, God uses a rock, right? Just like this rock, except it was really big. And you wouldn't think you could get water out of this rock, right? And God's people were so thirsty. And God told Moses to hit that rock and that water would come out. And so he provided for them. So this rock reminds us that God will provide for us, and that if we listen to him and we do what he wants us to do, then he will always provide a way. So we have a rock. Let me turn you around so you can see. There we go. We have a rock and our sand. And then I want you today to go out and look for plants that are starting to come up from the ground. So maybe some daffodils that might have already bloomed. There's other bulbs that might be coming out from the ground. So I want you to go out today when you're, getting your outside time, and look for things that are changing, that are starting to grow and bloom. And think about our story about Lent and how God has the power to change you and use you to do great things. Remember to be the light. You shine your light and love for all to see. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next week.